The New York Liberty are the last WNBA team to fill their head coach position.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm Kaila Butler. Joined alongside me is Sophia Jones. Plenty to talk about today, per usual. That's why you are tuning in with us every day to hear what is going on in the women's basketball world. We're going to get into a couple of topics. Jonquel Jones is joining Project B. We'll talk about her statement that she made and the decision behind it. AP Top 25 poll and what we have seen these past couple of weeks. But first, the New York Liberty are finally narrowing down their search for head coach, but they have still not filled the position. Sophia, you and I were talking about it. It seems like the other open spots were filled relatively quickly when we're thinking of the Storm, the Tempo. All of those were filled up. However, this seems to be the last team that is kind of holding out since firing Sandy Brondello. And, they have a very clear yet kind of unclear at times vision for what they are going to look like. And the GM, Jonathan Kolb, has emphasized that they need to make the right hire, not just stop a gap, and have really stayed true to this idea that they want to have somebody that's somewhat of a visionary, not somebody that's necessarily just controlling games. So yeah, a couple of interesting thoughts there. But in your opinion, what do you think is maybe slowing down their search or just picking somebody by this point?
I would honestly not be surprised if some of this was tied to the current WNBA CBA negotiations. It felt like a month ago when the Portland Fire, the Dallas Wings, Toronto Tempo, and Seattle Storm were making those head coaching decisions. The CBA was up in the air, but we were at least hearing reports about it. Whereas right now, in this current time, everything has been pretty hush hush while they're in this 30-day extension period. And I think that for potential candidates to be seeing all that go around, it's probably difficult to make the decision to want to be the New York Liberty's next head coach when there's so much uncertainty in what this next WNBA season is going to look like, what their potential salaries are going to be as well. So I think that's honestly what is really holding everything up. And for the other teams that had those vacancies, it was essentially the Sandy Brondello sweepstakes. It was reported that she picked Toronto out of the other teams that were also looking into her. And then after that, everything was just a domino effect. And except for the Portland Fire, who I believe hired their head coach first. But it was just a situation where they had their sights set on her. And right now for the New York Liberty, they have their sights set on a couple people. They're narrowing it down. But like I mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised that if it's just taking a little bit longer on both sides because so much of these negotiations are up in the air.
Yeah, we'll get into some of those candidates that they have narrowed down. They're now at a list of 3. The first one being Will Weaver, second one being Jama Mahlalela, and the third being Kristi Toliver. So we'll start back at the top with Will Weaver, who is a G League coach. He won the 2018 and 19 League Coach of the Year award for his work with the Long Island Nets. He has also worked in Australia, so he has some experience there. He has implemented a lot of NBA style defense plus transition heavy offense. He's also had experience being a head coach, obviously doing so in the G League. And he also is somebody that focuses on long-term development. He has talked about balancing win now goals with building a talent pipeline. So we could see some younger players coming to New York as well when we're thinking of the draft coming up. Obviously, free agency, who is going to stay in New York? Will they kind of try to clear house in a way? If they did since they did fire Sandy, who they want to bring in. Sophia, what are your thoughts on Will Weaver? How could he benefit this team?
I'm seeing in this candidate a trend that is also reflected in a lot of current WNBA coaches, which is that a lot of these front offices are looking to bring in international minds. We saw it heavily with Alex Sarama and the Portland Fire, Sandy Brondello. Of course, she spent a lot of time with the Australian national team. And now we're seeing with Will Weaver his experience coaching internationally in Australia again. Maybe the Liberty have a thing for Aussies, but yeah, I think he would be a solid candidate, especially having that head coaching experience, winning that G League Coach of the Year. I think that regardless of maybe level, as long as you do have that head coaching experience, it can still be valuable because there is a certain management level that goes on. And then just bringing the fact of New York Liberty, I feel like that is one of the teams in the W, if not the team that most reflects and represents the values of the city that they're in. And a lot of stuff is kind of on brand. And with his experience already in Long Island, he would have that transition as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I think this is something that kind of on the opposite end of it in terms of the strengths he has, also some of the weaknesses that I thought was interesting. Candace Parker mentioned is he doesn't have any experience working with the WNBA or any women's coaching experience. And this is something that Candace Parker brought up, that she would like to see more female head coaches within the league, just because there's that certain level of connection. Not saying that it's not possible. Obviously, we have seen many male head coaches have very successful teams and programs, but there also can be preferences for players at times too, if they would prefer to work with a female head coach, if they would prefer to work with a male head coach. That doesn't necessarily say anything about his capabilities of being a head coach, but in question of being able to manage personalities, connect with the players, and also just being able to adapt to being in the WNBA in comparison to the G League.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of everything as well. I think when you look at the personalities that are on the New York Liberty in Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, those are both players, and Jonquel Jones, Natasha Cloud. But there are a lot of personalities on that team that you definitely would have to manage. We don't know if this is going to be the same team that the next head coach will see, but that's definitely going to be a factor because the Liberty are always going to be an organization that attracts a lot of the top level free agents. So talent management is going to need to be a skill.
Absolutely. Moving down the list, Jama Mahlalela. He is Canadian. He worked his way up as an assistant coach from Toronto 905 in charge of player development. Raptors assistant, won a title in 2019, and now a lead assistant with the Raptors. Some of his skills are he's a really great communicator, has a lot of connection to players, and obviously has sort of a championship mindset and perspective, which aligns well with the Liberty, who obviously have won a championship in the past and are a winning team. In your opinion, Sophia, I know you know a little bit more about him in a way. How could he possibly benefit the Liberty?
Yeah, that's another just kind of international expertise that you're bringing in. Fun fact, he went to the same high school as my uncle and father in Toronto, not at the same time, he was a bit after. But so he's very heavily involved with Canadian basketball with the Raptors. He was a huge in their player development, spent a lot of time with Pascal Siakam, Norman Powell, Fred Van Fleet. So those are pretty, the epitome of players that you see where they really were able to take off and consider themselves in those most improved conversations. But he's also very involved with Canada basketball. So he's just another one bringing that international flair and flavor. Wow. Sorry, flair and flavor. But I mean, we will talked about how much we like the city of Toronto as well. I think that would be a good transition from Toronto to New York.
Mm.
Very big cities, both kind of the capital of their countries as well. And he spent a lot of time with the Raptors under some great basketball minds, winning that championship in 2019 with Kawhi Leonard. As someone who was rooting for the Warriors during that final, I like to put a little asterisk next to it because Clay and KD got hurt. Just wanted to say that. But he still has that championship expertise, which you need when you're coaching the Liberty.
Absolutely. The only potential issue with him is that he hasn't really there's limited high stakes head coaching experience in a way. But as you mentioned, he has had experience in other ways where that transition could be easy for him. But also have to mention Kristi Toliver, who is the only woman on this list and also the only former WNBA player. She has deep WNBA experience from being a two-time WNBA champion. Obviously has a lot of credibility and understanding of the league. Great connection to players, given that she was in their position before, and I'm sure keeps up with them quite often still. And she's also had NBA coaching experience while also understanding where WNBA players are coming from. So I feel like I know if the players maybe had a choice in it, I could see them having a really good connection with her, given just her being a former WNBA player and given how the league has been in terms of leadership, maybe wanting to rely a little more heavily on somebody who has been in their shoes before.
Yeah, and she spent this past season as an assistant coach with the Phoenix Mercury under Nate Tibbetts. That's a team that made it to the finals. So she both got the WNBA championship experience as a player, but also on the staff and the front office side a little bit. So I think that those are some really huge strengths for her. Also learning from Nate Tibbetts, who was a Coach of the Year candidate this past season.
Absolutely. After this, we will get into the AP Top 25 poll. We've touched on it a little bit, but the biggest shakeups that we have seen this past week. If you're a business owner, here's the truth. SaaS promised to make work easier, but now the average company is buried by hundreds of apps that slow down your teams and simply don't work together. That's not SaaS, that's sad. Software as a disservice. That's why you need Rippling. Rippling is the unified platform for global HR, payroll, IT, and finance all in one place. They've helped millions of businesses replace a mess of disconnected tools with one system designated to give leaders clarity, speed, and control. What I love about Rippling is how it removes the bottlenecks and busy work that slow terms down. Everything from onboarding to payroll to IT access runs automatically and perfectly in sync. And right now you can get 6 months free when you go to rippling.com/locked on NBA. Learn more at rippling.com/locked on NBA. That's rippling.com/locked on NBA for 6 months free. AP Top 25 poll this week. There were some consistent themes of UConn always going to be number one for the given next couple of weeks. I could imagine, unless there's a real shakeup. South Carolina remaining at number 2. UCLA, we've talked about this, maybe able to capture that number 2 spot sometime soon, but South Carolina really proving themselves in that win against USC. So staying strong in that number 2 spot. Texas has remained the same in number 4. LSU has remained the same in number 5. But Michigan making 8 spot jumps to now being number 6 after going 3-0, obviously dominating Notre Dame. Sophia, what has been the most surprising and maybe least surprising to you about this week's poll?
Well, Michigan's jump was pretty impressive. They rose 8 spots, and in the other direction, you have Notre Dame dropping 6 spots to number 24. So they really just fractured in opposite directions there. However, for that or for Michigan to rise that much, I think that's still an indication of how competitive of a team they still believe Notre Dame to be. I mean, they beat Notre Dame by 39 points. So whenever you are able to dominate another ranked opponent in that type of fashion, they're going to put a lot of stock in it. So I can definitely see why they had Michigan rise that many spots. But another one of the biggest surprises, I think, in this week's AP poll was Duke completely just getting shut out. They're the first team in that section that is the others receiving votes. However, they are still outside of the top 25 after having lost to West Virginia 57-49.
Let's talk a little bit about that game because that is one of the most fascinating games I have ever seen in life, truthfully. West Virginia had 6 players ejected, including 5 for leaving the bench after a scuffle with Jordan Wood, I believe. She had blocked one of West Virginia's players from shooting a 3 and kind of got in her face after it. But that led to quite the debacle afterwards, and players from West Virginia getting up from the bench, going in a way to defend the player. Duke only having 1 player ejected with Jordan Wood, but 6 players ejected for West Virginia, and they weren't even on the court. They were on the bench. But it is a rule that you're not allowed to leave the bench. You have to remain in your spot, or you are subject to getting ejected. But that also means that West Virginia played with only 5 players for the entire second half and were still able to beat Duke. Now, the fact that Duke has dropped out of the top 25 for this is maybe a little egregious, and West Virginia making a significant jump into being in the polls in general because of it. But this was shocking in general. I've truly never seen something like this. Do I think Duke deserves to not be in the top 25? Not necessarily, but you have to give credit to West Virginia for playing and having that high of a motor with only 5 players.
Definitely. Like, even the fact of your defense probably has to change because now as a player you're fearful of fouling out and leaving only 4 players to play that game. But West Virginia really just came in and yeah, I think they almost used that as a boost. But like you said, I think in the moment as a player, you want to have your teammates back, but that you can't leave the bench rule has ejected so many players in the past. I think it was a couple years ago when LSU and South Carolina were in the SEC championship game, and there were a lot of ejections going around just because people left the bench. Like, that is the biggest no-no for women's college basketball players. But super impressed with West Virginia and closing that game out. Sydney Shaw, she finished with 16 points. She's someone that I grew up playing with and against a lot in different trainings down in Miami. So glad to see her succeed after transferring from Auburn a year ago. Celia Riviera finished with 12 points off the bench. She was another huge contributor. She's from Paris, so that's some of the international flair that we appreciate seeing. And yeah, just Duke, I can kind of understand why they dropped out of the polls because it was the fashion that they lost this game in, quite frankly. If you would have taken the final score for the final score, maybe, but maybe they should have been back closer in there. But it's the fact that they didn't manage to beat a team that had 6 players ejected, only 5 available. That's what makes it just really sting. But I think that Duke does still have a good chance of working their way back up. They have some injuries. I think they're waiting for players to get back. And just with the talent that they have on that team, the mind of Kara Lawson, you can't imagine they're going to be down for too long.
You can't imagine that, but what I can imagine after witnessing Kara Lawson coach in real time is that she was on them after that game and is probably not happy, not about the performance, about any of the ejections, getting in players' faces, because she is a humble queen who can probably like cross you up and do anything to you, but she's not going to make it too well known. She's just going to let her actions speak for itself. So I'm sure we won't see this out of Duke anymore. They're going to get a slap on the wrist for this one. But after this, another WNBA player has been revealed in joining Project B.
Your ambition just met its match. With Robinhood, you play for the win, not just on game day, every day, logging in on every opening, beating your PR, beating it again. Channel that drive into your money. Robinhood puts you in control of your money. Trade stocks and ETFs, options, futures, and crypto all on one platform. You can now build and execute your own trades from a desktop with Robinhood Legends Advanced Tools. Or take advantage of the new Robinhood strategies with a tailored portfolio managed by a team of experts. You expect more from yourself. Expect more from your money. Get started today at robinhood.com/yourmoney. Again, that's robinhood.com/yourmoney. Your money, your move.
Sorry about that, guys. Don't know what the technical difficulty was there, but
I looked up from the read. I was like, where'd you go? Oh no.
I don't know where I went either. It just like booted me out. I was like, oh, I guess I've said enough words for today's podcast. But for our final segment, Jonquel Jones has joined Project B. We now have this is the third player that has been announced within the past couple of weeks, and it feels like they're doing this a little bit strategically. Why can't I say words today? Nneka Ogwumike was the first one to obviously announce that she was joining. Then we saw Alyssa Thomas join. Now our third WNBA player, Jonquel Jones. She said, I am super ecstatic and super honored to announce that I will be joining Project B to be able to continue to play against the best players in the world, to play with the best players in the world, and be able to see new parts of the world. Let's get it. Now, Jonquel Jones is a player that has played internationally before. This won't be anything necessarily new to her. She has played for Bosnia and other teams. However, it is interesting to see her join, and now I'm not going to be surprised by any other player that is on this list. But you know, we talked maybe they want me to eat my words a little bit because we talked about how these new investments are going to and new leagues are going to continue grabbing some of the top players within the league. And then it was like, okay, cool. That's what you said, Kalia. Well, we have Alyssa Thomas and now we have Jonquel Jones. And before I know it, now I'm going to have Asia Wilson on this list and somebody else. And we'll be like, oh, okay. Like maybe you guys know what's up over there. But what surprised you most about Jonquel Jones, if it did or not?
Yeah, I almost don't think that this one surprised me anymore. I think they seem to be filling out the front court right now. Because you have some pretty good forward centers already in that group of three between Nneka, AT, and JJ. But yeah, just I think for Jonquel Jones and her experience playing internationally, that this just follows right along. And it's interesting because you talk about how was Project B going to entice players to come. And Elena Beard was recently on Sarah Spain's podcast, and she spoke. Elena Beard, of course, is the chief basketball officer and co-founder of Project B, multi-time WNBA champion. After she retired, she went into venture capital. So she has that experience, but in that she was talking very candidly about she has a big desire to grow the global footprint of women's basketball, and that it was her mission to create access and opportunity for female athletes to get their feet in the door around venture capital because she knew the potential of what that could mean. And that's a huge part of what Project B is built on, the fact that a lot of these players have equity in the league, which I feel like is almost more enticement for them to want the league to grow and succeed and do well because their extra form of income is just automatically tied into that. But yeah, just even talk she also mentioned that she already has multiple all NBA, all WNBA team honors signed on.
Hmm.
So we've seen 3 so far, and it sounds like there are more. She also threw in that they have international players signed on. They have young players, and that consists of players from 4 or 5 different continents at the moment. So I think that for both of us having said that we're not sure how Project B is gonna entice, it sounds like they already had that situation locked up.
Absolutely. And they're going global, global. It's not even like countries in particular, it's continents. They are covering the world. I think another interesting part of this is she mentioned that consumers today are about the individual. So, similar to tennis, more people will be drawn to the names more than anything. And I think that was a really smart approach going about it, because it's obviously it's not an individual sport as tennis is. But if somebody knows that Serena Williams is playing in her last U.S. Open or whatever the case may be, a lot of people are going to want to be there and witness that because of the weight that her name carries. So the fact that they've been able to get an Alyssa Thomas, Jonquel Jones, Nneka Ogwumike, and some other players that are signed internationally that I'm sure have a lot of, their home based following. They're right though, because when I think about if somebody asks me who my favorite WNBA team is or my favorite NBA team, I don't truly have a lot of favorite teams. I have particular players that I love watching. So I could maybe not enjoy watching the rest of the team, but I enjoy watching that particular player play. So by default, I'm watching their games because it's not a one on one sport. So I think that was a smart approach in getting into it because she said none of these cities will technically have a home team. She's putting stake in the superstar names that the league can acquire. And clearly, they have been able to acquire quite a few names. And again, we don't even know all of those international names just yet that maybe hold more weight over there than they do in the US as of right now. But this is just 3 players that have been listed. I have a strong feeling that, as we're continuing to get closer to these CBA negotiations, and we've seen it almost like basically once a week, maybe bi-weekly, they are announcing more and more of these players that have agreed to join Project B. This is going to definitely be used as a tool to be like, hey, a lot of us are leaving. A lot of us are open to trying out new leagues. You guys are going to have to step it up for us to really want to come back and participate in the WNBA anymore.
Yeah, it definitely, I have to imagine, is strategic. And just going back to the fact about these, that the model kind of for Project B is centered a lot around the names of the superstars that they're able to get. I even think of a player like Paige Beckers, where okay, yeah, she had such a large fan base at UConn that loved her, and she went to the Dallas Wings, and now a bunch of people love the Dallas Wings, but they really love Paige on the Dallas Wings. So that model does make sense, and I'm very interested to see because she did mention younger players. We've gotten more players more so along that have been around for a while right now. So I'm very interested to see more names that come out. But another thing that Elena Beard kind of just clarified as well was she really emphasized that Project B is not Saudi funded, but they're partnering with the company Sela to have a globally diverse support system. And Sela is a global operating partner that is owned by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. And Project B is essentially paying them as a service to logistically produce their events. That company just did a Alvarez and Crawford fight on Netflix, so it sounds like while there was a little bit of debate where some of this money was coming from, it doesn't sound like it's coming from Sella necessarily. She mentioned a lot of comparisons to tech and how she wants, that funding is similar to that area. I mean, she was working in Silicon Valley for a little bit, and as someone who is living in San Francisco right now, there's a lot I can attest. There's a lot of money in tech. It's very futuristic, but yeah, I'm glad to have seen her be on this podcast and just speak more to what Project B is, because it's like this mysterious thing right now that no one really quite knows what it is. But it really sounds like she's ambitious to not only make this a women's league, but also a men's league, and to have it again be comparable to F1 and just put a lot of these people on a global platform.
Well, we're excited to see what comes from Project B and which WNBA player will be announced next for joining. But that is all for us today. Thank you so much for watching Locked On Women's Basketball. We will see you guys again tomorrow. Make sure to follow Sophia